What is the price of a good name? For Lady Seraphina Ainsworth, it was everything. She floated through the sterling grand ballroom, her future secured by a diamond ring and the promise of a lord's affection. But in high society, promises are as fragile as spun glass. In one devastating moment, she lost it all. Her engagement was shattered, her honor trampled, and her name became a whispered joke. They all laughed, the glittering lords and ladies who had toasted her health just hours before. But the laughter died in their throats when the ballroom doors opened, and he appeared. The man no one dared to cross, the ruthless Duke Alaric Blackwood. The air in the sterling grand ballroom was thick with the scent of hothouse roses and expensive perfume, a fragrant cloud that clung to the velvet curtains and danced in the warm glow of 1,000 candles. Chandeliers dripping with crystals like frozen tears cast a brilliant fractured light across the sea of elegantly dressed guests. It was the social event of the season, the annual Sterling Gala, and for Lady Seraphina Ainsworth, it was meant to be the pinnacle of her young life. Her gloved hand rested lightly on the arm of her fiancé, Lord Alistair Beaumont. He was everything a young woman of her standing was taught to desire: impossibly handsome, with hair the colour of spun gold, a smile that could charm a queen, and the heir to a respectable barony. Their engagement had been the talk of the ton for months, a seemingly perfect match between his family's rising influence and her family's ancient, if slightly tarnished, name. "You look breathtaking tonight, my dear Alistair," murmured his breath warm against her ear. His blue eyes, however, seemed to skim over her, already scanning the crowd for a more important acquaintance. That gown, the colour of a summer sky. Seraphina smiled, a practised, gentle curve of her lips. "You are too kind, Alistair." The gown was indeed beautiful, a pale blue silk creation that had cost her family a small fortune they could ill afford. Her father a viscount, with more pride than pounds, sterling, had insisted upon it. An investment in our future Seraphina, he had declared, his voice full of forced optimism. "Once you are Lady Beaumont, our worries will be at an end." The weight of that expectation felt heavier than the diamond on her finger. It was a brilliant stone, a cushion-cut marvel that glittered with cold fire under the candlelight. It was a promise not just of marriage, but of salvation for the Ainsworth name. It was the reason she ignored the subtle yet persistent chill in Alistair's demeanour over the past few weeks. It was why she dismissed his fleeting glances and distracted replies as the natural pressures of a man in his position. They moved through the throng, a golden couple receiving nods and smiles. Yet beneath the veneer of polite society, Seraphina felt a current of something else. Whispers seemed to follow them, ceasing abruptly when she turned her head. Lady Beatrice Finch, a notoriously sharp-tongued gossip, gave her a look that was less congratulatory and more pitying. Seraphina's stomach tightened. "Is that your father with Baron Beaumont?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. She gestured with her fan toward a secluded alcove where the two older men stood in tense conversation. Her father's face was pale, his posture rigid, while Alistair's father, Baron Beaumont, looked imperious and unyielding. The Baron was a man carved from granite, his ambition legendary, and his methods often questioned. Alistair followed her gaze, and a muscle jumped in his jaw. "Just business, I imagine. Father is always about his business." He steered her pointedly in the opposite direction toward the refreshment table. "Champagne," before she could answer. A booming voice cut through the polite murmur of the room. Alistair, my boy, Baron Beaumont, strode toward them, his face a mask of false joviality that didn't quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. He clapped his son on the shoulder, his grip possessive. "There you are. I have someone you simply must meet." The Baron's gaze fell upon Seraphina, and for a fleeting moment she saw an undisguised flash of contempt. It was so potent, so dismissive, that it felt like a physical blow. He offered her a curt, dismissive nod before turning his full attention back to Alistair, effectively erasing her from the conversation. "Lord Rutherford has just arrived with his daughter Catherine," the Baron said, his voice low but firm. "The Rutherford fortune, Alistair. Think of it. Shipping textiles. They practically own half of Liverpool." Seraphina's blood ran cold. Catherine Rutherford. A mousy girl, but an heiress of unparalleled wealth. The whispers she'd heard all evening suddenly coalesced into a single terrifying thought. Alistair looked from his father to Seraphina, a flicker of something guilt, perhaps, or panic in his eyes. "Father, now is not the time. Now is precisely the time," the Baron countered, his voice a low growl. "The time to secure our family's future, not tie it to a name whose only asset is its history. We have discussed this. Discussed this," the words echoed in Seraphina's mind. The floor beneath her feet, once so solid, suddenly felt like treacherous ice. She looked at Alistair, her fiancé, the man who had sworn to love and protect her, and saw not a partner, but a puppet. His handsome face was a canvas of conflict, his loyalty to her warring with a lifetime of obedience to his father. "Alistair," her voice was a fragile whisper. "What is your father talking about?" He wouldn't meet her eyes. He stared at a point over her shoulder, his jaw tight. "Seraphina, it's complicated." Baron Beaumont scoffed a harsh, grating sound. "There is nothing complicated about it. It is a simple matter of ambition, a lesson your family has long forgotten, Lady Seraphina." He then turned his expression, shifting back to one of public pleasantry, and raised his voice, commanding the attention of those nearby. "My friends, if I may have your attention for a moment." A small announcement regarding the future of House Beaumont. The music faltered. Conversations died down. Dozens of curious faces turned toward them. Seraphina felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, sharp and probing as needles. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a gilded cage. She looked at Alistair, pleading with her eyes for him to stop this, to deny whatever poison his father was about to spew. But Alistair remained silent, his gaze fixed on the marble floor, a golden statue of a man, beautiful and utterly hollow. The diamond on her finger suddenly felt like a shackle, a cold, heavy lie. The perfect evening, the promise of a perfect life, was about to shatter into 1,000,000 pieces. The silence that fell over the ballroom was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was a predator's silence, full of anticipation. Every eye was fixed on Baron Beaumont, whose smug expression revealed he was savoring the moment, the absolute power he wielded over so many lives in this single, calculated instant. Seraphina felt her own breath catch in her throat, a knot of ice forming in the pit of her stomach. Her father was still across the room, his face ashen, frozen in a tableau of helpless horror. He knew. He had known this was coming. "As many of you know," the Baron began, his voice resonating with false sincerity, "my son Alistair has been engaged to the lovely Lady Seraphina Ainsworth." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. A few polite, uncertain smiles flickered through the crowd. Seraphina's hand, still on Alistair's arm, began to tremble. Alistair did not move, did not even seem to breathe. "It has been a charming arrangement," the Baron continued, the word charming, laced with a dismissive poison. "A delightful dalliance for two young people. However, circumstances change. Fortunes shift. As head of my house, it is my duty to ensure the continued prosperity and elevation of the Beaumont name." He finally turned his gaze fully on Seraphina, his eyes like chips of flint. And in that regard, a new, more suitable alliance has presented itself. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The whispers started instantly, a sibilant hiss that slithered through the stunned silence. Serafina felt the blood drain from her face. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not like this. A broken engagement was a scandal, a private shame to be handled with quiet letters and hushed meetings. A public dissolution at the Sterling Gala was an execution. "Alistair," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "Tell me he's wrong." Alistair finally looked at her. The guilt in his eyes was overshadowed by a pathetic, pleading weakness. He looked like a boy being chastised, not a man ending a betrothal. "Serafina, I am sorry. My father is right. It is for the best." "It is for the best." The 4 words were a slap, colder and crueler than any physical blow. They were the words of a coward, an excuse wrapped in the guise of logic. The diamond on her finger suddenly felt alien, a vulgar trinket from a life that was no longer hers. With numb fingers she began to pull it off. The Baron saw the movement and smiled a thin, triumphant slash of his lips. "It seems the lady understands. The engagement between House Beaumont and House Ainsworth is hereby dissolved." The ring came free. It was surprisingly light. She held it out to Alistair, her hand shaking so violently she was afraid she might drop it. He took it from her, his fingers brushing hers for a final cold time. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. And then the laughter started. It began as a quiet titter from Lady Beatrice Finch, a woman who thrived on the misfortunes of others. It was quickly picked up by another, then another, until a wave of cruel, mocking laughter washed over Serafina. It was the sound of vultures descending. They were laughing at her fallen state, at her family's failed ambition, at her public humiliation. Each peal of laughter was a stone cast a fresh wound. She was no longer Lady Serafina Ainsworth, the celebrated fiancée. She was a cautionary tale, a social pariah created in the space of a single heartbeat. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, the glittering chandeliers and smiling faces melting into a horrifying, distorted mosaic. She wanted to run, to flee the ballroom, and the hundreds of eyes that were dissecting her, but her feet felt as if they were nailed to the floor. She stood alone in a circle of scorn, Alistair and his father already turning away, moving toward the Rutherford family, who were watching with undisguised satisfaction. She was yesterday's news, a stepping stone, already submerged beneath the tide of their new ambitions. Her father began to push his way through the crowd, his face a mask of rage and shame, but he was too far away. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The laughter grew louder, more confident. Someone made a joke about the Ainsworths' last gamble. Another commented on the sad state of her sky-blue gown, now the color of her prospects. She closed her eyes, praying for the floor to swallow her whole. The humiliation was a physical entity, a crushing weight on her chest that made it impossible to breathe. This was it. This was her ruin. Her life in society was over. She would be the girl who was publicly discarded at the Sterling Gala. It was in that moment of absolute despair, when the laughter reached its crescendo, that a sudden, profound silence fell upon the room. It was not a gradual fading, but an abrupt cessation, as if a great bell had been struck, its single commanding note absorbing all other sounds. The laughter choked in people's throats. The whispers died. Serafina opened her eyes, confused by the sudden shift. Every head in the ballroom had turned not to her, but to the grand entrance. Standing there, framed by the enormous oak doors, was a figure who seemed to draw all the light and air in the room toward him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in immaculate black evening wear that stood in stark contrast to the colourful silks and velvets of the other men. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, and his face was a masterpiece of harsh, aristocratic angles. But it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were a pale, piercing grey, as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. It was Duke Alaric Blackwood, the Shadow Duke, a man of immense, almost mythical wealth and power. A man who rarely attended social functions, and whose presence was always a sign of something momentous. He was ruthless in business, formidable in politics, and utterly terrifying to his enemies. His gaze swept across the room, and everyone he looked upon seemed to shrink, to become smaller under the weight of his silent assessment. Baron Beaumont's triumphant smile faltered. Even he, a man of considerable ego, looked unnerved. The Duke's eyes continued their slow, deliberate path across the room, passing over the lords and ladies, the gossips and the schemers, until they landed, with unnerving precision, on her. On Seraphina, standing alone, a broken toy in the center of the ballroom floor. For a long, stretched moment, he simply looked at her. The silence was now absolute. No one dared to breathe. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace that was both elegant and predatory, Duke Alaric Blackwood began to walk toward her. Every step the Duke took was a thunderclap in the unnatural quiet of the ballroom. The sea of guests parted before him, as if by an invisible force, their mockery and scorn replaced by a palpable collective fear. He moved not like a man walking through a crowd, but like a wolf striding through a flock of sheep. His pale grey eyes never left Seraphina, and with each step he took, the cavernous room seemed to shrink until it contained only the two of them. Seraphina was frozen, a statue of disbelief and shock. The Duke of Blackwood was a legend, a phantom of the ruling class. Stories about him were whispered in hushed tones of rivals, financially ruined overnight, of political opponents, who simply disappeared from public life, of a heart encased in ice. He was not a man one simply met at a gala. He was a force of nature one hoped to avoid. And he was walking directly toward her. He stopped a respectable 2 feet in front of her. He was even taller up close, a towering presence that blocked out the rest of the world. The scent of winter air and expensive leather clung to him, a stark, masculine contrast to the cloying floral perfumes of the ballroom. "Lady Seraphina Ainsworth," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a low, resonant timbre that cut through the silence with absolute authority. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. She could only manage a nod, her throat too tight for words. His gaze was intense, analytical. He was not looking at her with pity, the emotion she had seen in the eyes of some, and dreaded more than their scorn. He was looking at her as if he were assessing a piece on a chessboard, calculating its value, its potential, its next move. His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to the spot on her hand where Alistair's ring had been. He then turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, and finally settling on Baron Beaumont, who had gone rigid with apprehension. Baron the Duke's voice was clipped sharp as a shard of ice. "I seem to have arrived at an inopportune moment. You were making an announcement." The Baron, who had commanded the room with such arrogance only moments before, now stammered like a schoolboy. Your Grace, an unexpected honor. I was simply clarifying a private family matter." Private Duke Blackwood's eyebrow arched with cynical disbelief. "It seemed rather public to me. You declared the engagement between your son and this lady to be dissolved. Is that correct?" "It is," the Baron said, puffing out his chest in a desperate attempt to reclaim some of his lost authority. "A business decision, you understand. For the betterment of my house, I see the Duke said softly. His eyes narrowed. You believe a Rutherford alliance is better for your house than an Ainsworth one. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, demonstrating a chilling awareness of the room's undercurrents. You have weighed Lady Seraphina's worth, her family's honor, and your son's sworn vow, and you have found them lacking. The Baron paled. The Duke's words, spoken so calmly, stripped his actions bare, exposing the greedy, dishonorable truth for all to see. The crowd, which had been so eager to join in the Beaumonts' victory, now held its collective breath, sensing a shift in the balance of power. The Duke turned his attention back to Seraphina. The coldness in his eyes seemed to recede, slightly replaced by something unreadable, something that was neither warmth nor pity, but a kind of focused intensity. Lady Seraphina, he said, his voice dropping to a more personal, yet still commanding tone. The Baron is a poor judge of value. He took another step closer, closing the distance between them. A collective gasp went through the room. This was an unprecedented breach of decorum. He was standing too close, his attention too singular. He sees a tarnished name and an empty coffer. The Duke continued his voice, a low murmur meant for her alone, yet every person in the silent room strained to hear it. I see resilience. I see a lineage that predates his by 5 centuries. I see a woman of impeccable grace who has just been forced to endure a display of astounding vulgarity. Her heart, which had been beating a frantic, panicked rhythm, suddenly gave a single powerful thud. No one had ever spoken of her like that, with such stark, unequivocal validation. And then he did the unthinkable. Duke Alaric Blackwood, the most powerful and unapproachable man in the kingdom, went down on one knee before her. The room erupted in a symphony of shocked gasps. Women clutched their pearls, their fans frozen mid-flutter. Men stared their mouths agape. Baron Beaumont looked as if he might faint from sheer apoplexy. Alistair, his face a mask of white, took an involuntary step forward before freezing in place, utterly cowed. The Duke looked up at Seraphina, his fierce grey eyes holding hers captive. From his waistcoat, he produced a small black velvet box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a ring. It was not a delicate diamond like the one Alistair had given her. This was a formidable piece of jewellery, a massive square-cut sapphire, the colour of the deepest midnight ocean, flanked by 2 severe ice-white diamonds. It was a ring of power, of history, of command. It was the signet ring of the Duchess of Blackwood. They laughed at your broken engagement, Lady Seraphina, he said, his voice clear and ringing with authority. Let them now bear witness to a new one. He held the ring up to her. My name holds more weight than the Baron's could ever hope to. My fortune could buy his barony 10 times over, and he would be none the wiser. My word is my bond, and it is never broken. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Marry me, Lady Seraphina Ainsworth. Become the Duchess of Blackwood. And we will show them all what true power looks like. The world had narrowed to the space between Seraphina and the kneeling Duke. The gasps of the ton, the furious, sputtering face of Baron Beaumont, the ghost-white shock on Alistair's features, it all faded into a distant, muted roar. All that existed was the formidable man before her, and the impossible, life-altering question hanging in the air. Her mind was a whirlwind. This was madness, utter, complete madness. She didn't know this man. She knew of him as everyone did. She knew the whispers of his ruthlessness, the tales of his cold, calculating nature. He was the darkness to Alistair's superficial light. Yet here he was, offering her a lifeline, so spectacular it was beyond the realm of fairy tales. He was offering her not just rescue, but elevation. He was offering her a crown. She looked from the Duke's intense, unblinking eyes to the ring. The sapphire seemed to absorb the candlelight, its dark heart holding secrets and power. It was everything. Alistair's ring was not bold, ancient, and utterly uncompromising. Her voice, when she finally found it, was a thin, reedy thing. "Your Grace, I don't understand. Understanding can come later," he replied, his voice low and steady, a rock in her sea of confusion. "What matters now is your answer. Will you allow your name to be dragged through the mud by this peacock?" He flickered a dismissive glance at Alistair. "Or will you attach it to mine?" The choice was stark, impossible. To refuse him would be to choose ruin. She would be an object of pity and scorn for the rest of her days. Her family would be devastated. To accept was to leap from a crumbling cliff into the arms of a stranger, a formidable, intimidating stranger whose motives were a complete mystery. She saw her father at the edge of the crowd, his face a maelstrom of shock, hope, and terror. She saw Alistair, his mouth opening and closing, silently, utterly stripped of his power, his fate now being decided by forces far beyond his control. And she saw Baron Beaumont, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple, his meticulously planned triumph turning to ash in his mouth. In their faces she found her answer. The humiliation she had felt moments before began to curdle, hardening into a cold, sharp anger. They had tried to break her. They had treated her as a commodity to be discarded. They had laughed. Duke Alaric Blackwood was not offering her love. She knew that. He was offering her an alliance, a weapon. He was offering her revenge. Slowly, deliberately, Seraphina extended her left hand. It trembled slightly, but her resolve was solidifying, turning from frightened jelly to hard steel. "Yes," she said, her voice gaining strength, echoing in the stunned silence. "Yes, Your Grace. I will." A slow, dangerous smile touched the Duke's lips. It did not reach his eyes, but it transformed his harsh features into something devastatingly handsome. He took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers, and slid the heavy, cool sapphire onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He rose to his feet in one fluid, powerful motion, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a firm, brief kiss to her knuckles. He did not release her, but kept her hand securely in his, turning them both to face the stunned assembly. "Let it be known," he announced, his voice booming with absolute authority, "that Lady Seraphina Ainsworth is now under my protection. Any slight against her is a slight against me. Any insult to her name is an insult to the house of Blackwood." His cold grey eyes landed directly on Baron Beaumont. "And I do not suffer insults lightly." The Baron flinched as if struck. The threat, though veiled in formal language, was terrifyingly clear. Alaric then turned to Seraphina, his demeanour softening infinitesimally. "It is late, my lady. The air in here has become unpleasant. Allow me to escort you home." Without waiting for a reply, he placed her hand firmly on his arm and began to lead her from the centre of the ballroom. The crowd parted for them, their faces a mixture of awe, terror, and rabid curiosity. The whispers started again, but they were different now. They were not mocking, but fearful and speculative. No one was laughing anymore. As they passed the Beaumonts, Alistair took a hesitant step forward. "Seraphina," he began, his voice choked with a mixture of regret and disbelief. The Duke stopped, turning his head, just enough to fix Alistair with a look of pure, undiluted ice. "That is, Your Grace, or the Duchess, to you, Lord Beaumont. You have forfeited the right to use her given name." Alistair shrank back, silenced and defeated. Serafina did not look at him. She kept her chin high, her eyes fixed on the grand ballroom doors, the gateway to her escape and her new uncertain future. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a play in which she was the lead actress. The woman who had entered this ballroom hours ago, full of hope and naive love, was gone. In her place was someone else, someone harder, colder, and now inexplicably more powerful than she had ever dreamed. The Duke led her into the grand foyer, away from the prying eyes and suffocating atmosphere. The cool night air that drifted through the open doors was a welcome relief. He did not speak until they stood by the entrance, where his black, unmarked carriage awaited the Blackwood crest gleaming subtly in the lamplight. "My driver will take you home," he said, his voice returning to its formal, distant tone. "I will call upon your father in the morning to make the formal arrangements." She finally turned to face him, the enormity of what had just happened crashing down on her. Why, she asked, the single word encompassing 1,000 questions. Why her why this? What did he want? The Duke looked down at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Baron Beaumont and I have a long and complicated history. He believes in taking what is not his. Tonight he sought to discard something of value. I merely recovered it." The words were cold, calculated. He spoke of her as if she were a lost treasure, a strategic asset. There was no romance in his gesture, only purpose. And yet he had saved her. "You have my gratitude." "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady. "I do not want your gratitude." "Lady Serafina," he replied, his grey eyes intense. "I want your loyalty. This marriage will be a partnership, an alliance of houses. I will give you protection power and the means to see your enemies humbled. In return, I expect your complete and unwavering fidelity. Not to me as a husband, but to our shared goals. Can you give me that? It was a contract, not a proposal. A treaty between two sovereign nations." She looked at the heavy sapphire on her finger, then back at his unyielding face. She had no other choice, but for the first time it felt like a choice she was actively making. "You have it, Your Grace." He gave a single sharp nod of satisfaction. "Good. Go home, Your Grace-to-be. The real work begins tomorrow." The news of the Duke of Blackwood's impromptu engagement spread through London like wildfire. By dawn, every drawing room, every gentleman's club, and every lady's morning visit was consumed by it. The story was repeated, embellished and analysed from every conceivable angle. The public humiliation of Lady Serafina Ainsworth had been eclipsed by the sheer audacious power of the Duke's countermove. It was a masterstroke of social warfare, and the ton was both terrified and thrilled by it. At Beaumont House, the atmosphere was funereal. Baron Beaumont had flown into a rage the night before, smashing a priceless vase and roaring at his son for his weakness. Now a grim silence had settled over the breakfast table. The morning papers were laid out, the society pages filled with breathless accounts of the Sterling Gala. Alistair stared at a headline, "The Shadow Duke claims his Duchess." His appetite gone. "This is a catastrophe," the Baron finally hissed, throwing his napkin onto his plate. "He did this to spite me, to humiliate me." Alistair looked up, his face pale and drawn. "What history do you have with him, father? Why would he go to such lengths?" The Baron's face darkened. "That is none of your concern. All you need to know is that Alaric Blackwood is our enemy. He has been for years. He plays a long, vicious game, and this is his latest move." He slammed his fist on the table. "He has taken the girl we cast aside and turned her into a weapon to be used against us." He's made her the Duchess of Blackwood. She will have power, influence, access. She can ruin us. The irony was crushing. In trying to discard Serafina for her lack of influence, they had inadvertently handed her more power than they could have imagined. Catherine Rutherford and her Liverpool fortune suddenly seemed a paltry prize compared to the might of the Blackwood Duchy. Meanwhile, in the modest but respectable Ainsworth townhouse, a different kind of shock had taken hold. Serafina had not slept. She had spent the night by her window, the heavy sapphire on her finger, a constant, surreal presence. Her parents had vacillated between terror at her connection to the formidable Duke and elation at the sudden, unbelievable reversal of their fortunes. True to his word, precisely at 10 o'clock, the Duke's carriage arrived. It was not the ostentatious coach of a dandy, but a sleek, powerful vehicle, all black lacquer and polished silver, drawn by two perfectly matched black stallions. Duke Alaric Blackwood was shown into her father's study. The meeting was brief and brutally efficient. There was no negotiation. The Duke laid out his terms. He would settle all of the Ainsworth family's debts, restore their country estate, and provide Serafina with a personal fortune that would make her independently wealthy for life. The marriage contract was already drawn up by his solicitors. Her father, utterly overwhelmed, could only stammer his agreement. After the formalities were concluded, the Duke requested a private audience with his fiancée. They met in the family's small sunlit garden, a stark contrast to the shadowy ballroom where their fates had intertwined. "Your father has agreed to the terms," he said, without preamble, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied a rosebush. "You left him little choice," Serafina replied, her voice more defiant than she expected. He turned to her. A flicker of something, was it approval, in his eyes. "Choice is a luxury, Lady Serafina. You and I know that better than most. We are given moments, opportunities, and we must seize them or be crushed. And I was your opportunity," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. An opportunity to strike at Baron Beaumont. Indeed, he admitted freely. The Baron built his fortune on the ruins of other men's lives. My father was one of them. Years ago, Beaumont used fraud and deceit to steal a significant parcel of land from my family, the Northwood Tract. It was not the most valuable of our holdings, but it was sentimentally important. My father challenged him, and Beaumont orchestrated a financial scandal that nearly ruined my family's name, if not our finances. The stress of it led to my father's early death. The confession was delivered in a flat, emotionless tone, but Serafina could feel the deep, cold rage that simmered beneath the surface. This was not just business. This was a blood feud. He thought the matter was buried, forgotten. The Duke continued, his gaze distant. He grew arrogant. "Casting you aside so publicly was more than dishonorable. It was a mistake. It gave me the opening I have been waiting for. So I'm a pawn in your game of revenge," she said, a bitter taste in her mouth. "Do not mistake my meaning," he said, turning to face her fully. His intensity was almost overwhelming. "You are not a pawn. You are the queen. A pawn is sacrificed. A queen is protected at all costs, for she is the most powerful piece on the board. With you as the Duchess of Blackwood, you will have access to circles I cannot easily enter. You will hear the whispers of the society that shuns me. Together we will dismantle Baron Beaumont's empire, piece by piece, until he has nothing left." He was offering her a partnership in vengeance. He was appealing to the anger she felt, the humiliation that was still a fresh, open wound. He was not asking her to be a demure, obedient wife. He was asking her to be a soldier. "Why tell me this?" she asked, genuinely curious. "You could have simply married me and used me without my knowledge. Because a partner who understands the strategy is infinitely more valuable than a tool that is merely pointed in the right direction, he replied. I am offering you a choice, Seraphina. He used her given name for the first time, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. You can be a passive duchess, enjoying the wealth and status that comes with the title. Or you can be my ally. You can help me deliver justice to the man who wronged both our families. The choice is yours. He stood there, a figure of shadow and power, offering her a future she could never have imagined. It was a dangerous path, filled with intrigue and deception. It was a world away from the simple, happy life she had once dreamed of with Alistair. But that dream had been a lie. This, in all its cold, hard reality, was the truth. This was her new life. Seraphina spent the next hour walking the paths of the small garden, the Duke's proposition echoing in her mind. He had left, promising to return that evening to escort her and her family to the opera, their first public appearance as an engaged couple. It was a clear, strategic move designed to solidify their union in the eyes of the ton and serve as a direct challenge to the Beaumonts. Her initial fear of the Duke was slowly being replaced by a complex mix of apprehension and reluctant admiration. He was ruthless, yes, but he was not dishonest about it. He had laid his cards on the table, offering her a clear, albeit dangerous role in his plans. He saw her not as a fragile flower to be protected, but as a potential equal, a partner in a shared cause. She thought of Alistair. She had believed she loved him, but looking back, she realized she had been in love with an idea, the idea of a perfect life of security, of fulfilling the expectations placed upon her since birth. The Alistair, she thought she knew the charming, attentive suitor, had vanished the moment his father applied pressure. The real Alistair was weak, a man who would trade his honor for his inheritance without a second thought. The pain of his betrayal was still there, a dull ache in her chest, but the fire of her anger burned brighter. He and his father had deemed her worthless. The entire glittering society had laughed at her fall. They had all played a part in her humiliation. The Duke was offering her a chance to rise from those ashes, not just restored, but transformed into something far more powerful. He was offering her the opportunity to make them regret it. When her mother, the Viscountess, found her by the fountain, her face was a portrait of maternal anxiety. Seraphina, my dear, are you well? The Duke. He is a very intimidating man. Are you certain about this? To be bound to such a person? Seraphina turned, and her mother was taken aback by the newfound steel in her daughter's eyes. The frightened, heartbroken girl from last night was gone. I am more certain than I have ever been, Seraphina said, her voice calm and even. Lord Alistair offered me a comfortable cage, mother. The Duke is offering me a sword. I know which one I would rather hold. That evening, a transformation occurred. Using a small portion of the funds the Duke had already transferred to her family, Seraphina purchased a new gown. It was not the pale, innocent blue of the night before. This gown was the color of blood and rubies, a deep, defiant crimson silk that clung to her figure. Her hair was swept up in an elegant, severe style, and at her throat she wore a simple diamond choker, a gift that had arrived from the Duke that afternoon, with a note that simply read, "The opening salvo." When Duke Alaric Blackwood arrived, he found her waiting in the foyer. He was dressed in his customary black, a stark and stunning figure of a man. His eyes swept over her from the top of her head to the hem of her crimson gown. For the first time, she saw a flicker of genuine, unguarded admiration in his gaze. "Red is your color, my lady," he said, his voice a low rumble of approval. The colour of power. I thought it was appropriate for a declaration of war, she replied, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. He matched her smile with one of his own, a rare, breathtaking sight. Indeed. Shall we, my co-conspirator? He offered his arm, and as she took it, she felt a jolt of electricity. It was not the giddy, youthful spark she had felt with Alistair. This was something different, something deeper and far more potent. It was the feeling of two powerful forces, a lining of a partnership being forged in fire and ice. Their entrance into the Royal Opera House caused a sensation. Conversation ceased. All heads turned as the fearsome Duke of Blackwood strode into the grand hall with the disgraced Lady Seraphina on his arm, now looking less like a victim and more like a triumphant queen. The heavy sapphire on her finger flashed under the gaslights, a defiant symbol of her new station. They were shown to the Duke's private box, the most prominent in the house. As Seraphina sat, she was acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes on her. She saw Lady Beatrice Finch gaping her mouth open in shock. She saw the Rutherfords looking on with sour, envious expressions. And then she saw them. Across the opera house, in a less prominent box, sat the Beaumonts. Alistair looked as if he had seen a ghost. Baron Beaumont's face was a thunderous mask of pure hatred. Seraphina met his gaze, directly held it, and offered him a slow, deliberate, and utterly chilling smile. She saw him flinch. The Duke sat beside her, his presence a solid, reassuring wall. He leaned in slightly, his voice for her ears alone. "Well played, Duchess. You've drawn first blood without saying a word." "I am merely following my partner's lead," she murmured, her eyes still locked with the Baron's across the cavernous space. She had made her choice. She was no longer just Lady Seraphina Ainsworth. She was the future Duchess of Blackwood, and she had just embraced her new role with a ferocity that surprised even herself. This was not a marriage of love or passion, not yet. It was a calculated alliance, a pact for vengeance and mutual gain. And as the orchestra began to play, Seraphina felt a thrill of anticipation. The opera on the stage was nothing compared to the one that was about to unfold in the heart of London society, with her and the Duke in the starring roles. The week following the opera was a whirlwind of calculated maneuvers orchestrated by the Duke with Seraphina, now an active and willing participant. Their engagement was formally announced in the Times, a simple declarative statement that shook the foundations of the aristocracy. Wedding preparations began with breathtaking speed and efficiency, the Duke's staff descending upon the Ainsworth townhouse to manage every detail. Seraphina was fitted for a trousseau of gowns and jewels that would have made a princess envious. But beneath the surface of social preparations, their true work was beginning. The Duke's study at Blackwood Manor became their war room. It was a vast, intimidating space, lined with books from floor to ceiling, with a large mahogany desk and a fireplace that could roast an ox. Here, Alaric shed the persona of the cold, unapproachable Duke and became a focused, brilliant strategist. He laid out maps, financial ledgers, and stacks of documents for her. "Beaumont's power has 3 pillars," he explained one evening, tracing a line on a map of the county. "First, his land holdings, including the Northwood tract he stole from my family. Second, his investments primarily in the East India Company, which are leveraged against his land. And third, his social standing, which gives him the political influence to protect the other 2. And you intend to knock all 3 out from under him," Seraphina surmised, studying the documents with a keen eye. "Precisely," Alaric said. "And we will begin with the land. The original charter for the Northwood tract was never legally transferred. Beaumont holds a forgery. The original was rumoured to have been hidden by your great-grandmother, who was a close confidant of my grandmother the Duchess at the time. It's why my family always suspected The Ainsworths might have a clue to its whereabouts, and why Beaumont was so eager to form an alliance with you in the first place to secure his fraudulent claim through marriage. Suddenly it all clicked into place. The Beaumonts' initial interest in her wasn't about her name. It was a preemptive strike to bury a secret. And when the Rutherfords became available, he decided it was easier to discard me and hope the secret remained buried. His arrogance will be his undoing, Alaric said, his voice laced with grim satisfaction. My sources believe the charter's location is hidden in a cipher, something passed down through the female line of your family. A song, a poem, a piece of embroidery. Seraphina's mind raced. She thought back to her childhood, to rainy afternoons spent in her grandmother's sewing room. Her grandmother would hum old tunes while she stitched. There was one she was particularly fond of, a simple, strange little lullaby about a hunting lodge. Where the black woods meet the stone. Seraphina murmured the words coming back to her as if from a dream. Past the sleeping fox and hare. Find the hearth that holds no fire. My sweet treasure slumbers there. Alaric went still. His grey eyes, usually so controlled, widened with a sudden intense light. What did you just say? It's a lullaby. Seraphina explained, a thrill running through her. My grandmother used to sing it to me. She said her mother sang it to her. It was about an old abandoned hunting lodge on the edge of our old estate. The Ainsworth estate borders the Northwood tract. Where the black woods meet the stone, Alaric repeated, his voice low and urgent. He strode to the large county map on the wall. His finger traced the border between the two properties. The Blackwood estate borders the Ainsworth lands. There is an old stone wall that marks the boundary. A sleeping fox and hare. Those are crests on the old Ainsworth gateposts. And the hunting lodge? It burned down 50 years ago. All that remains is the foundation and the great stone hearth, the hearth that holds no fire. They stared at each other across the room, the air crackling with the electric thrill of discovery. This was it. This was the key. The first move in their grand, intricate game. We will ride out tomorrow at dawn. Alaric declared, his face set with a fierce, triumphant determination. Their alliance, born of humiliation and a desire for vengeance, had just borne its first fruit. It was no longer just a contract. It was a true partnership, a meeting of minds. As Seraphina looked at the ruthless Duke, she saw more than just a savior or a strategist. She saw a man whose wounded past mirrored her own, a man who understood the cold fire of a righteous grudge. She had entered the Sterling Gala as a lamb, ready for a quiet, comfortable life. She was now poised to become a wolf, and alongside the most dangerous wolf in the kingdom, she was ready to hunt. The game was afoot, and for the first time in her life, Seraphina felt the intoxicating thrill of holding the winning hand. So the stage is set for a battle that will shake the very foundations of high society. Lady Seraphina, once a victim of cruel laughter, now stands as a formidable player, armed with the power of the Blackwood name, and a secret that could bring her enemies to their knees. Her alliance with the ruthless Duke Alaric is more than a marriage of convenience. It's a pact forged in the fires of betrayal, a partnership poised to deliver a long-overdue reckoning. Their journey has just begun, and the path to justice is fraught with peril, intrigue, and a connection deeper than either of them ever expected. What other secrets lie buried in the past, and how far will they go to claim their victory? If you are captivated by Seraphina's transformation and the Duke's masterful gambit, please don't forget to hit the like button, share this story with a friend who loves drama and revenge, and subscribe to the channel for more tales of shocking twists and karmic justice. Your support means the world and ensures these stories continue. Thank you for listening.